Everyone is welcome to another edition of the Institute of African Studies seminar series. My name is Chika Mba, and since no one will announce the announcer, so I have to introduce myself, a research fellow here at the Institute of African Studies. So what you have here is in certain respects, bringing Professor Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni today to speak on academic freedom or the global politics of knowledge and implications for academic freedom is in certain respects a continuation of the conversation the Institute of African Studies director we initiated last year in August, where we hosted a series of panel discussions on academic freedom, 25 presenters, and then we had participants from both University of Ghana and outside at the Great Hall. At the end of that proceeding, what became clear was that the issues and problems that impinge on academic freedom are wide-ranging, many of them external. And like Professor Martin Ajay said at that moment, scholars are able to hold the line against these external factors, but not always. The solution, the idea behind his presentation and many others was to see whether there are other approaches that we can take to continue that struggle. And then there are many other presenters who focus, like Professor Aite, Professor Naneki Anyidoho, and so on, focus on internal issues that actually impinge, that threaten academic freedom. So we are sure that today, following what we heard yesterday from the workshop that was hosted by Professor Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni, that today will be a continuation of focusing on both internal and external threats to academic freedom. When I'm done, the director, Professor Samuel Ntewushu, will welcome everyone, both online and in person, to this event. After which, Dr. Kofi Asante takes over as moderator to introduce the guest. At the end of presentations by both Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni and Professor Pulen Seralo, there will be Q&A for up to 1 hour, where you can ask questions and make comments. I gather we have in excess of 40 persons online. You are able to ask questions by raising your virtual hand, and then we will see your hand and then invite you to speak. So Samuel Ntewushu to open the conversation.
Thank you very much. Organizers of this seminar, especially our own Dr. Chika Mba, senior colleagues and colleagues, our special guest, Chair Dr. Asante Kofi, our respondent, Professor Segolo, students, invited guests, our guests online, ladies and gentlemen. As usual, as a director, I'm supposed to welcome all of us here. And of course, you see that you are indeed already welcome. But I'll formally welcome all of us to the Institute of African Studies and then to this very conference hall, the Kwabena Nketia Conference Hall. Today, we are so honored to have Professor Sabelo to talk on the topic, the contemporary politics of knowledge implications for academic freedom. We have a chair here, so it's not my duty to introduce you. It's also not my duty to talk so much about this. The chair is going to do so. Mine is to simply welcome you and our guests and colleagues to this seminar. So the job is very simple. But before handing over the mic, haven't made everybody welcome. Sabelo, I would like to thank you so much for your works. I was cracking a joke with you that we had this project on crafts, and we have Dr. Eric Tamete, who is our lead investigator. So we have Dr. Thomas Edu, our colleague. He will soon join us. So we're done with our research in Somania and also in Northern Ghana. And then we started writing our paper. At a point, one of our colleagues, Dr. Thomas Edu, indicated that it appears the paper lacks some vitamin and protein, and that it was completely malnourished, and we needed to inject it with something that will let it be acceptable in terms of nutritional content. So the name Sabelo came up. That was around March. I had never known you. I've never read you. So I think we had about 2 or 3 of his papers. Is that not it? So when the papers were finally printed, Epistemic Freedom in Africa, the challenges in reconfiguring African studies, intellectual imperialism and decolonization in African studies, the cognitive empire. I brought it here for you to know that I'm a good student of yours. So I have your lecture notes. On the basis of this, please, I would like to hand over to our chair, Dr. Asante. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Director. I don't have as poetic and flowery a language as Professor Ndlovu, but I must say I'm very honored to be seated on this panel with 3 very eminent scholars. It is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni to deliver this very important presentation on academic freedom. As Dr. Imba has already introduced, the notion of academic freedom has been a topical issue at the University of Ghana. A couple of years ago, we were UTAG, that's the University Teachers Association, the Union for Lecturers. Led a spirited campaign against the Public Universities Bill, which would have had very serious implications for academic freedom, would have stifled the space for academic freedom. But then, of course, like we said, the external threats are just one of many. Okay, like this. Yeah. So, yeah, we would have a lot of space to go into debate and delve into all of the areas and threats and all. But now I would want to introduce Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni and hand over to him to do the presentation. So Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni holds professorial and research portfolios in several universities in South Africa and the United Kingdom. He's a prolific scholar with hundreds of publications, including more than 20 books. And I should say, just like Professor Ndlovu, just last week I read 3 of his publications, all published this year. So that shows how prolific he is. And I would say in that sense, I look forward to be as prolific as you are. His latest publications includes Epistemic Freedom in Africa, Deprovincializing and Deprovincialization and Decolonization, published by Routledge. Also from Routledge in 2020, he published Decolonization, Development, and Knowledge in Africa, Turning Over a New Leaf. And last year, he published Marxism and Decolonization in the 21st Century, Living Theories and True Ideas, which he co-authored with Morgan Ndlovu. And he has a publication with the CODESRIA book series, Beyond Coloniality and Internationalism, Reworlding the World from the Global South. So with this, you get a sense of the very rich presentation he has in store for us. So I'll just want to hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Maybe let me start with a very technical issue. Yesterday, we had a better mic, which I will put here. than this one which I carry in my hands. It disturbs me a lot. Me. Sorry about that, but I hope it will be done quickly. So, okay. Okay. No, thank you so much. Sorry about this, but it's necessary that I don't catch anything because I use my hands sometimes. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And thank you, Director, for opening up. And because I don't know other colleagues who are here, I will just say all protocols are observed and then move straight into the presentation. I'm told I have about 30 to 40 minutes. I have a long paper, but I will try to not read it, but to pick what I think are the main issues, so that I'm not very good in reading speeches. I write the papers, but I then pick what I think is important. One issue which I always try to avoid when I come to spaces like this is trying not to be irrelevant. So a topic like this one, you can start anywhere. But because I'm here in Ghana, I think let me start with the two issues which I think are more relevant to this country, to this university, and this part of the world. And this is about the year 1957, the importance of the year 1957. 1957, Ghana gains independence as the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to do so. And that year, I don't think there's anybody who is an African who doesn't know that year. That year is known by most of us because it was one of the proudest moments in African history, if I can use the words of Paul Tiambezaleza, that decolonization really is the proudest moment in African history. But 1957 also is important in the sense that that is when the largest African Studies Association was formed in the United States. And that brings the political importance of 1957, but also the epistemic aspect of it. This important African Studies Association is not formed in Africa, it is formed in the United States. And as it is formed in the United States, it inaugurates African studies as area studies. And when we talk about area studies, we're talking about this field of study which were actually produced as part of what we call global imperial designs. And it is important to start from there in this country because the formation of the African Studies Association in the United States also led to what we speak about in terms of the Africanist enterprise as a problem in African studies. The Africanist enterprise being the dominance of Africanists in driving the agenda in African studies. And that concept comes from William and West in 1999. And I don't think we are yet free from that. And it has implications for academic freedom. And it is interesting that in 1961, then you have the establishment of the Institute of African Studies here, which really, in terms of its intention from the conversation which I had with the director, Nkrumah seemed to be, was actually building something else which is not informed by global imperial designs, but something which is informed by Pan-Africanism and the anti-colonial nationalism. And from 1957 up to today are not yet resolved in terms of who really drives the African agenda in terms of knowledge in African studies. And that to me is very important as one issue to highlight. But the other part which relates to that formation of African Studies Association is also related to this country, in the sense that during that time, that's when W.E.B. Du Bois was beginning to think about the Encyclopedia Africana from the United States. But the first president of the African Studies Association, the anthropologist Melville Herskovits, it comes out today in recent times that he was the one who was blocking the funding of the Encyclopedia Africana. And not only that he was doing that, but in the presidential lecture which he gave in 1958, it has implications for what we're talking about today, the issue of academic freedom. In that lecture, and you can find it, it is published in 1958. He actually says the Africanist in the United States will produce better knowledge on Africa. And his issue was that he said the United States does not have colonies. It's like Britain and France, which have colonies. And because they have colonies, they are interested parties, so what they are producing is not objective. Then secondly, his argument is that they will produce scientific knowledge about Africa because of distance. They are distant from what they are studying. And that has implications for scholars who are based on the continent, because the idea was therefore that those who are based on the continent and the African scholars, their problem is that they are too close to what they are studying. And therefore, they are subjective. So I wanted to pitch that for now, but I want to go on to the second point, which I think also relates to where we are. First of all, from yesterday, I argued that I don't want to create an impression that academic freedom violations are an African problem. It is not an African problem. It is really a global problem, if anything, a planetary problem. And in this paper, I actually said it is a pandemic, the violations. And because of that, we will need to locate it in what I called the contemporary politics of knowledge. And yesterday, we need to locate it in what is called the global economy of knowledge, so that we understand how imbricated it is with the society, with societal debates, with the state debates, with the economic debates, and the epistemic debates. But coming back to Ghana again, I think it would be important also to reflect from where we are here. We always say in decolonial thinking, we need to think from where we are. And because we're here, this is why I started with the 1957. But the second aspect, which is also important for us to reflect on, is widely quoted speech or excerpt of the speech of Kwame Nkrumah vis-a-vis the purpose of the university and vis-a-vis academic freedom. As a historian, I wanted to get the primary source because I see it is quoted in many spaces. I don't know whether they are quoting him right because I'm also picking from a secondary source. So for me, I took it from Tandika Mkandawire. And the excerpt goes like this. It is said that Kwame Nkrumah said, "We do not intend to sit idly and see the institutions which are supported by millions of pounds produced out of the sweat and the toil of common people continue to be centers of anti-government activities. We want the University College to cease being an alien institution, to take on the character of a Ghanaian university, loyally serving the interests of the nation and the well-being of our people. If reforms do not come from within, we intend to impose them from outside. And no resort to the cry of academic freedom. For academic freedom does not mean irresponsibility. And this cry is not going to restrain us from seeing that our university is a healthy university devoted to Ghanaian interests. I don't think we can just ignore that type of an argument, a very eloquent argument. And I will sometime just try to distill what emerges from this type of argument. Let's begin by trying to understand where Nkrumah was thinking from when he put forward this argument. Let's begin to think that academic freedom is firmly tied to unpredictable vagaries of state power. And let's also focus on this statement because while Nkrumah's intervention has to be understood in this context, there are a number of emerging issues which are important for us as we think about academic freedom today. And the first point which I picked from that speech, the first point is that the new post-colonial states inherited institutions that had serviced colonialism, and there was need to repurpose them to serve the African nationalist and Pan-Africanist liberatory projects. And this argument is supported by Tandika Mkandawire, who then says African universities were cursed by their parentage, which made them easily suspect in the eyes of the nationalists. If this well-founded suspicion is taken seriously, can Nkrumah be blamed for expecting universities to be turned into national institutions and for warning us academics not to use the claims of academic freedom to block the necessary revolutionary change? The second point that to me emerges from this speech is that of inherited colonial institutions which were not anchored in society and they existed as imposed alien formations which served another purpose. It seems Nkrumah's idea was not just to turn these institutions into national ones, but to imbue them with African values. And if we read this together with what Al-Mazrui termed domestication of modernity as a decolonizing strategy. The third point which comes out of Nkrumah's speech is something which also haunts us even today. And that is the issue of funding of institutions. Nkrumah actually alludes to that. We can't spend all these millions in funding the universities. Then you tell us because of academic freedom, we must not intervene. So the third point is how the funding of institutions tend to give those who give us funds the power and the entitlement to interfere with the institutions. This is true not only of the post-colonial state, but it is true today for external foreign funders as well. So they also determine a lot in what they give you as money, but at the same time they give you what is called the TOR, but terms of reference. They begin using that to control what you can say and what you must say. These interferences, I will argue, impinge on academic activities, institutional autonomy, and academic freedom directly. But the fourth point, which comes from Nkrumah's argument, is also an important one for us to reflect on. And this is the point about our social responsibility when we speak about academic freedom. And this comes out mainly from the declarations on academic freedom, which comes from Africa. The Dar es Salaam Declaration and the Kampala Declaration, which emphasize that you don't just speak about academic freedom and you ignore the whole issue of social responsibility. And this is why Nkrumah was saying, don't use that irresponsible. You need to use it in a responsible manner. But he raised also other controversial issues about loyally serving the national interests and the well-being of our people. And that immediately for academics, it will raise the question, how loyalty and the interests are defined and by whom? But Thandika Mkandawire tends to say there is logic in that argument. And he says, in the early years of the triumphant nationalists, armed with the unspeakable testimonies of their personal commitment to the nation, many years in exile or detention, stood on very high moral ground. Indeed, they could, with some justification, claim that they spoke for the nation when they chastised academics for abusing academic freedom by engaging in trivial pursuit that did not address the urgent tasks of nation building and development. Then finally, Nkrumah also hinted at universities continuing to be centers of anti-government activities. And this one, I think, is the most problematic part of his speech, because academics are always put under pressure. You need to speak truth to power. How do you speak truth to power if somebody can easily stand up and say, are you anti-government or not? So I thought I will start with these two as part of reflecting where I am standing. I'm standing here in Ghana, so those 2 points to me, they make sense. However, despite this entry point, my intention is to open the canvas of the analysis wide beyond Africa, because the perilous state of academic freedom has reached the level of a pandemic. The cases of violations of academic freedom, while they vary across geospatial spaces or regions in terms of nature and intensity, they also cut across the global north, global south divides. And therefore, we need to have a bit of a broader take on the problems of academic freedom. So the first issue which I will look at is also the issue of contemporary politics of knowledge and the perilous state of academic freedom in general, before I will go into the other areas. And what I picked in this generality is this issue that we are discussing academic freedom within a moment which is very troubling. And this moment is a moment whereby you will see issues which relate to what we call information warfare. Disinformation, trolling, and the post-truth. We are also discussing this issue of academic freedom within the context of what is called wokeness. And they were discussing also the issue of academic freedom within the context of what we call cancel cultures. And they were discussing it within what I have tried to describe as resurgent and insurgent decolonization. We are also discussing this within a context of escalating repression of independent thinking. And indeed, we are also discussing this within a context in which there is politics of correctness. And there is also other contextual issues which we need to flag as we discuss academic freedom here. The problem of liberal tolerance, which enables even racist, patriarchal, sexist, hate speech to masquerade as intellection. And they were also discussing this within a context in which there is reactionary right-wing backlash against critical race theory, against Black history, against Black studies, against queer studies, against intersectionality studies, and against decolonial thinking. And that is not the best scoping of the challenges. There is also what Fuhen Sultana termed the colonial nostalgia, in which you have other scholars who are taking advantage of the confliction of academic freedom and the right speeches in order to perfume, sanitize colonialism, and they're saying colonialism was a positive force. And you will find scholars like Bruce Gill, scholars like Nigel Baker, who have written books trying to perfume the dead corpse of colonialism, and trying to say, no, but colonialism was not as bad as we put it. And from South Africa, you can think about, Puleng is here, Helen Zille's speech also about colonialism and apartheid being not all, it was not all bad. And that also we need to reflect on, and we must reflect on it on the basis of facts. And the key fact here is that to advocate for recolonization, for instance, as Bruce Gill does, is to advocate for violation of human rights of other people. And this comes clearly from the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 1514, Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and the Peoples of 14 December 1960, where the declaration states clearly that the subjection of people to alien subjection, domination, exploitation, constitute a denial of fundamental human rights, is contrary to the Charter of the United Nations, and there is an impediment to the promotion of world peace and cooperation. So whenever you raise that question of, I think colonialism was progressive, you need to think about, do you think these people who issued this resolution were made that colonialism was a dehumanizing process? But what enables colonial nostalgia and the revisionism is that we also live at a time of liberal tolerance. Hamish Dabati correctly depicted it as bleeding heart liberals of the inane mantra. Oh, I disagree with you, but will give my life to defend your right to say it. So that gives actually a window to right-wingers to then come in and say whatever they are saying. And the Tapashi highlights the mess in which the academia finds itself as a result of deference to liberal tolerance and what he called bizarre bourgeois etiquette, which leads to calls for dialogue, even with the figures who are outrightly racist. But let's meet, let's have a conference, let's discuss the paper of a racist. And he says, he blames us academics. And he says, at what point will noble anger, utter disgust, principled indignation, and the moral courage overcome this banal bourgeois gentility? At what time are we going to stand up for this? And he says, it is obscene to be tolerant to obscene ideas. This is not me, it's him saying it. It is obscene to be tolerant to obscene ideas. And he goes on to elaborate and say, no, absolutely not. Certain historical calamities are no longer subjects for scholarly debate and a difference of opinion. The genocide of the Native Americans by European settler colonialists, the savage history of African slavery by the self-same European settlers, and their descendants, the criminal enormity of the dropping of the atom bomb on innocent Japanese, the Jewish Holocaust, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians by secular colonialist Zionists, and the monumental murderous history of European colonialism around the world, these are no longer up for scholarly debates. These are monuments of moral shame. That is Tapashi who is saying that. And then, of course, I said, some might differ with Tapashi's conclusion and argue that there must be no sacred cows which escape academic and intellectual debates, and that they will use academic freedom to justify that. But what I think he underscores is that pursuit of scholarship has to have a moral compass, and it has to be underpinned by intellectual and academic social responsibility. And this position seemed to be shared by Sultana, who also highlights that the academia is already being undermined by some academics. And she continues to say, who pass off oppressive and violent ideologies or historical negationism under the misguided notion of free speech or academic freedom. Taking these complex issues into account makes sense that we therefore locate the subject of academic freedom within the broader context of the struggles for epistemological decolonization and the contemporary politics. And I wanted to then go to foundational problems before we go to their manifestation. And I think one of the foundational problems for academic freedom is nothing other than Eurocentrism. Or whether people claim that it is no longer foundational, but I think it is foundational to most of the problems if we look at the external factors. This does not mean we will then ignore the internal factors. And Ali Mazrui, as far back as 1975, introduced this concept of dual tyranny when he was discussing academic freedom. And he said dual tyranny speaks about Eurocentrism as an external tyranny and a political repression as an internal tyranny. So he says, whenever you are discussing academic freedom, you need to actually be aware of these two, domestic tyranny and the external tyranny. And when it comes to Eurocentrism, he says, it is the Eurocentrism of academic culture as we know it today, the degree to which the whole tradition of universities is so thoroughly saturated with European values, perspective, and orientations. The very institution of the university became, in our type of situation, virtually a mechanism for transmission of European culture to non-European parts of the world. African universities are indeed instrument for transmission of Western culture. Whether they were specifically intended to be or not is another story. The graduate we produce from Makerere and Ibadan or Dakar is a human being who has moved substantially towards becoming a specimen of European tradition. All of us who have been educated at Western type universities or who are at universities are at least on our way towards becoming substantially Europeanized. Many of us already are. That's what he says. And then he goes on to say, what then are the implications for academic freedom? Then he says clearly, academic freedom in the sense of substantial intellectual independence is seriously compromised in a situation where Africans are almost always intellectual followers and almost never intellectual leaders. If the purpose of academic freedom is in our part to create conditions for intellectual creativity, the purpose is compromised by the heavy Eurocentrism of academic culture. And I don't want to bore you with that, but I wanted to raise that as one of the most important external source of the problems. And it has implications for many things, to the extent that if you go to the work of the Ghanaian feminist, Afro-feminist scholar, Sylvia Timale, she raises this issue of we need to connect the dots. We need not to be confused by symptoms of problems. We need to go into the roots of the problems. And she puts it very well, and she says, how do we divert paternalistic, fetishized, and poisoned gaze of Western reader from our continent? How do we develop critical consciousness to counter racist patriarchal hegemonic power? Who will connect the, and I like this one most, who will connect the ideological dots of racism, colonialism, capitalism, sexism, and heterosexism in ways that our children can understand? Can we move beyond Eurocentric hegemonic knowledge hegemonies? How do we navigate Eurocentric modernity without losing our Africanness? I will jump a lot of issues because they are telling me I have 10 minutes when I need 100 minutes. I think what is emerging also from the work of Sylvia Timale is also that when we think about academic freedom, we need always to think also about how to depatriarchize knowledge. And that is also picked up also in the work of Ayesha Imam and the Amina Mama. And they help us a lot in the sense that they then analyze particular fields of study or disciplines. They start with anthropology, psychology, philosophy to history. And in that, they explain how othering is actually inherently part of the disciplines. And if you read it from an Afro-pessimist point of view, they will tell you that, but the conception of the human and the conception of the social itself was against the indigenous, the black, and the native. And if it is the foundation of humanities and the social sciences, how will it liberate us when it was foundationally against? And that is a challenge. I don't have an answer for that. But what I did in this paper, since I won't be able to go through the whole of it, I then tried to pick case studies. The United States, to me, became an important aspect because it claims every time to be leading us into a better future. It claims that it is leading a free world. But if you look at the violations of academic freedom in the United States, particularly in the state of Florida now, where they are trying to ban everything to do with Black history, Black studies, then you can tell that there is a mythology which they are selling us. The second, which I also thought was very important for us to reflect on, is what is happening in France. France is using the Republican ideas of fraternity, liberty, what is the third one? Equality. And it says, don't talk about race. Don't talk about all these things. You are actually being divisive to a republic. And if you are talking about this, it means you are importing them from the United States and they're irrelevant in France. And they go on really to then say, anybody who raises things from a decolonial point of view, from a Black feminist point of view, from an intersectional point of view, they say these people are actually part of a big group which is called Islamo-leftism. And these people who are part of that, they support Palestine, and at the same time, they are anti-white. So you will see that, and the way I'm based in Germany, you see the way they are instrumentally using the issue of anti-Semitism. Whenever you raise your issues about issues of race and all this, and particularly if you raise issues relating to the Palestine-Israeli issues, quickly the flag of anti-Semitism is raised, and you can go to the cases of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was also accused of that. Chimbembe was accused of that, and I hope more will be accused very soon. But when we then turn to Africa, which I think is very important, I tried also to think with African thinkers. So I basically draw from African thinkers to try to think through this. And one person whom I draw a lot of inspiration from is Ali Mazrui. Ali Mazrui is the one who said, who killed intellectualism in post-colonial Africa? And I then tried to push that and they said, who killed academic freedom in Africa? And he identified the 3 killers. He said the first killer is the warrior tradition. And he used that to analyze Uganda after the rise of Idi Amin. And he says in Uganda, part of the answer is obvious, a military coup in 1979, where a vice chancellor disappeared and a chief justice disappeared. If public figures like that can disappear. And he says, before long, I took my bags and they left my beloved Makerere because of the warrior tradition. But I want to extend that warrior tradition to say, even the current government in Uganda, which came out of a barrel of gun, actually continues the tradition of the warrior tradition, even if it did not stage a military coup. And we had the interviews with some of the fellows who come from that country, and they said, this is correct analysis. And it is said that under the warrior tradition, the soldiers will tell you, we are action-oriented. That's one. Secondly, we don't tolerate too much words. And 3, we want discipline. So in the universities, we want discipline. We want the students to follow discipline, academics to follow disciplines, and then you can as well see the consequences of that. And then in Kenya, he said the problem is elder tradition. And yesterday we talked here about tradition, modernity. We talked about titles. We talked about so many issues which I didn't reveal that this actually feeds into the elder tradition, which Al Mazrui identified as a problem in Kenya, where Mzee Kenyatta, because of that title, you needed not to oppose him, and then it actually links with what we call what Al Mazrui called the domestic tyranny, and then when it came to maybe before I even move out of that, I think the warrior tradition in combination with the elder tradition, you can also see it in my own country, Zimbabwe, where Mugabe came from the liberation struggle. He always was proud of his, what they termed liberation credentials. And by the time of his death, he was also Kushungo. He was now being worshipped, and nobody could argue against him. And he was the chancellor of all the universities in Zimbabwe. And in 1992, they enacted what was called the Zimbabwe Amendment Act, which for the first time, they tried to then control the university. And it was an interesting time because this one, I saw it at first hand. I was a student at the university, and we demonstrated a lot against it. But what was good about it is that when they began to interfere like that, the vice chancellor of the university by then, Professor Walter Kamba, did not side with the political elite like what the vice chancellors do today. During the graduation of 1992, he announced in the presence of the president that I'm going to resign. And in that announcement, he said, my conscience is my master. There are too many unprofessional fingers interfering with the university. And yesterday, it became very relevant. I thought about it because Chika was asking the question, who is the guardian of academic freedom? And he said, do we teach about academic freedom? And when I was seated down there, I said, if I come back after tea, I will need to answer this question. I think the guardian of the academic freedom must actually be the vice chancellor. And not the vice chancellors of today who are largely political appointments. I mean vice chancellors who are actually decorated intellectuals, men and the women of letters, who actually believe in the academic project and defending it. Not who believe in salaries and the perks which come with that. And that is very important because at the moment, that is the problem which we're having. And I will put it as crudely as that. But let me conclude, my chair will kill me here. Because one of the issues is, having said this, analyzing things is very nice, is very easy. But when it now comes to how do we come out of these problems? Already, I think Imam Aisha and the Amina Mama, they've already given us some indication that, but we need to take feminist science seriously. Because where there is this patriarchal Eurocentric knowledge, the feminist scholarship has already challenged that and given us openings into other ways of doing knowledge, which is non-patriarchal. So there is that which we need to reach to. The second one is to then also put pressure on the leaders of the university that they must actually be guardians of the university, not become the dictators of the university. The dictatorship which is outside in society must not actually see itself being replicated in the universities. Not only by vice chancellors, but also by head of departments, by deans, by academics terrorizing students themselves. So if we want academic freedom, you must actually be a model of a good academic yourself. You can't demand academic freedom so that you become an ivory tower, then you terrorize other people. I think that we need to start by looking at ourselves, our practices. How do we supervise people? How do we teach? Do we really practice what in the UK system they will call pastoral care? When people come under you, do you really give pastoral care? And then the other issue which I think we need to debate, maybe we'll talk about it during Q&A. How do we rescue ourselves here to rescue the academic project itself and the university itself? And that takes us to a discussions on, is there something which we can call the constitution of knowledge, whereby there are agreed or common ways of generating knowledge, distinguishing fiction from facts, as well as understanding how to arrive at intellectual and academic truth as part of safeguarding academic freedom? Because at the moment, it is conflated with the speech rights. And this, I think, is very important that we also don't think about it from a neoliberal point of view, in which neoliberalism itself is actually one of the killers of academic freedom. And the controversial educationist in South Africa, Jansen, at least on this one, he got it right. On this one, he said the students under neoliberalism are clients, teaching is inputs, publications are outputs, curriculum is unit standards, measurement is accountability, assessment is performance, scholarship is metrics, graduates often ready are for the labor market, leadership is management. We need to liberate ourselves from this corporatized business model of the university. I think we need also to, when we reconstitute knowledge, we need to reconstitute it in such a way that we liberate academic freedom from its liberal capture. The liberal capture is very problematic in many ways. Of course, it says right, anyone can say anything, but at the same time, the right-wingers, they leach into that. And they use academic freedom against academic freedom. You see the point. They are using academic freedom against academic freedom. And what we need to do is really to, in the moment of what we call resurgent and insurgent decolonization, we need to reconstitute knowledge. And reconstituting knowledge means that it takes into account what we call academic democracy. Again, a concept which comes from Ali Mazrui, and he's talking about who is represented at the council of the university, who is represented at the senate of the university, who is represented at the committees of the university. And he calls that academic democracy. Then we have what I've termed academic epistemic freedom. When we talk about epistemic freedom, we're not just talking about the right to speak, but which knowledges are legitimated and which ones are delegitimated from the university. And that, to me, is very important. Also, coming back home here, Professor Kwesi Pra, when he gave the humanities lecture in 2006 at the Human Sciences Council, he pitched this concept, intellectual sovereignty. That in Africa is not only about rights within a colonized university. You need to be also changing the university in the way Nkrumah suggested. And the roads must fall moment in South Africa was an important router in which we needed to lead and reconstitute knowledge. And I will end with that. I will elaborate on other things when we come to question and answer. Thank you so much. Should I sit down? Sure.
Thank you very much.
My apologies for apparently, especially for those who are online, someone has been sending messages in my name to some participants, even some of the messages threatening that the people will be attacked and all of that. The messages are not coming from me, please. I'm not even near my computer. But we have successfully kicked out the hacker. Back to you. Okay, by the way, to just recognize that as the program was ongoing, a number of prominent persons from the university joined the meeting. We have Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni, I mean, the former VC is here present. We also have the presentation from UTAG, UG, the person of Jerry Jo Harrison, Dr. Jerry Jo Harrison, who is the secretary of UTAG here at UG. Welcome, Dr. Jerry Jo Harrison.
Thank you very much. I think it's your anecdote is a good segue from the brilliant presentation by Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni, which has really given us so much food for thought. I'll quickly introduce our respondents who address some of the issues before we go for Q&A. So Professor Puleng Sigalo is a Fulbright scholar and a professor of psychology, currently holding the position of Chief Albert Luthuli Researcher at the University of South Africa. Areas of specialization include African-centered psychology, gender and trauma, and decolonial feminism in psychology. Her research focuses on historical trauma, visual methodologies, and gendered suffering. She is currently the 2023 to 2025 Research Fellow at the University of Kansas's African Studies Center and the 2023 Research Fellow at the University of Ghana's Institute for African Studies. She has published widely both nationally and internationally and is the Associate Editor of the Journal of Social and Political Psychology, as well as being a board member of the Journal of Feminism and Psychology. I hand over to you.
Director. I would like to acknowledge all the distinguished guests with us this afternoon. Sir, former Vice Chancellor, I acknowledge you, sir. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I'm delighted to be back home here in Ghana. I always say it's my second home. And so I'm delighted indeed to be back home. It's really my honor to be responding to Professor Gatsheni's talk today, to offer just a few thoughts that I hope will assist us as we get to the question and answer. And as technology would have it, I'm not sure. I think as the system opens up, I think Prof. Gatsheni really offered us a. Sorry, please don't go. It's not. It's not opening. I think Prof. Gatsheni assisted us by starting with offering the historical excavation. We always say understanding history is important because it assists us to be able to make sense of the moments that we're finding ourselves in today. So centering Nkrumah's vision and challenge to universities in Africa and their responsibility to responding to Africa's realities is critical as we embark on this project of really saying what is academic freedom today. Indeed, we find ourselves discussing the idea of academic freedom in very complex times of intersectional challenges, as Prof has indicated, the moment of wokeness and the moment of cancel culture. Just recently in South Africa, one of our colleagues at the former white institutions, Dr. Mzileni, came under fire, and the threat of losing his job, again, the problem of academic freedom. And this happened because he dared to teach about the perpetual anti-racism that persists in South Africa. And we see here the audacity of whiteness, right? Where a white group called AfriForum called for him to be fired. And this is something that happens in 2023, that as an academic within an institution of higher learning, that you are censored in what you teach. So what history is allowed, what history is not allowed. So engaging and having discussions with students about the perpetual anti-racism, which is persistent in South Africa indeed, is therefore perceived as a problem, right? So what knowledge is allowed and what knowledge is not allowed within institutions of higher learning. So the idea of Euro-Western traditions and knowledge production continue to persist. And it's not only today, again, it comes from a long history. And here I just want to summon the spirit of Julius Nyerere, who was also reflecting on this idea of what knowledge is centered when we're thinking about what counts and what doesn't count. And I just want to quote a few lines from a speech that he made. And he says, I quote, "When we were at school, we were taught to sing the songs of the Europeans. How many of us were taught the songs of Wanyamwezi or Wahele? Many of us learned to dance the rumba and the cha-cha-cha. I'm sure all of us know what that is. But when I ask what is Wanyamwezi, we don't know what that is. He says, how many of us can dance or have even heard of the Gombesugu, the Mangala, the Konge? It is hard for any man, he argues, and woman, to get much real excitement from the dances and music which are not of his own blood," unquote. And then go on to also just briefly draw from a Ghanaian also, who also reflects on this idea of knowledge production, right? Killing people's culture is killing the essence of who they are. Because for many of us in the culture lies how we understand economics, how we engage with history, our spirituality, the land and what it provides and what it means in terms of ceremony, in terms of ritual, our languages, an overall sense of being human. Colonizers broke the backbone that allowed people to stand tall and left many of us with wounded souls. And here again, linking this to education and how the education system plays into this, Kofi Bosua argues that he became painfully aware of his isolation. He says, what does education mean, really? When he went to school and when he came back, he was transformed. He says, I understood my community far less than boys my age who never had formal education. So Kofi's reflection speaks to the importance of knowing and understanding our history and lived realities and centering these within institutions of higher learning. So how is our education linked to what happens in our communities, what is taught in our communities, and how all of these together continue towards the upliftment and the building of our society. The modern university claims a universal import as a site for the study of the human. However, the ideas concerning knowledge and knowledge production have for centuries been developed from this imperial Western Eurocentric modernity and forced on all of us, on the rest of the world, particularly in South America, in Asia, in the Caribbean, and here in Africa. So Ndlovu-Gatsheni reminds us that the global South is a victim of continuing epistemicides, and he centered this in his talk, which speaks to the killing, the silencing, the annihilation or devaluing of existing indigenous knowledges. So that example from Nyerere speaks to this killing and silencing of African ways of knowing and being. Moreover, this refers to the systemic undermining of knowledge systems that fall outside Western traditions. So epistemic injustices are persistent and very systematic and collectively work as a structured and systematic oppression of particular or specifically African ways of knowing. Gatsheni has pointed to how the decoloniality enterprise seeks to excavate these subjugated and displaced indigenous knowledges and place them at the center of the academy and knowledge production. The reconfiguration of the geopolitics and the repositioning of the African continent in the international system cannot happen outside of knowledge production and dissemination. We all know there's power in knowledge. You know, the one who's got knowledge has got the power, but it's also important for us to think about what knowledge is this, what knowledge is being centered. Shai locates knowledge and knowledge production as a key platform where the contestation of power resides. An interesting relationship is noted between power and knowledge. And within the decolonial circles, we also talk about being as well, being human, who counts as human and who does not count as human. As such, Shai goes on to posit that the one who controls knowledge controls the world, right? And in his book titled An Afrocentric Idea on Contested Knowledges, Selected Cases, he gives an Afrocentric perspective to the debate on knowledge production in the global South. And he debunks the notion that knowledge production is the prerogative of the global North and that Africa has no role to play in this regard. One of the main challenges, I argue, that faces institutions of higher learning today is the inherited or transplanted systems that are on the opposite end of most of the African indigenous societies and that shape people's ways of knowing and being. How much of our communities are central in the kind of knowledge that we have in our universities? And this is a complex challenge that requires us to consider the important meaning of an African university. And then this brings us to the discussion of a truly African university. And this is where I think your work, Gatsheni, contributes to this rethinking and reflection that a truly African university is one that draws its inspiration intellectually and otherwise from its own environment, not a transplanted tree, as you argue, from elsewhere, but one that is planted and nourished on the African soil. So that idea of, I think from where I am, as you indicated, is very critical. We cannot be in Africa, but then thinking from the global north in terms of the theories and the concepts that we use. The emphasis here is on the strengths and potentials of experiential and indigenous knowledge. In the quest to produce relevant knowledge, one must think from where they are. And thinking from where we are is also acknowledging our environment. It's also acknowledging what's embedded in our communities. This speaks to a vision that allows Africans to think, to theorize, to interpret the world, and write from where they are located. This also speaks to the idea of academic freedom, being able to know from where you are. Similarly, scholars such as Knowles and colleagues argue that the focus should be on the knowledge that allows people to be recognized and to thrive by working with the knowledge that speaks to who they are in the most holistic sense. However, we know that there are gatekeeping mechanisms, right, that we often have to contend with. And Prof, you've mentioned a number of these, right? And I want to just a few minutes in this, that gatekeeping within knowledge production institutions is a common phenomenon that negatively impacts the decolonial enterprise. The student is using a decolonial theory, they're doing their PhD, and then the question at the end is, who's going to examine my thesis? I'm scared to draw from this, Prof, because it's a challenge. I attended this class and they said, what is that, right? So the decolonial enterprise is very important. And here South African scholar Moletsane alludes to the use of complex gatekeeping strategies that we have in our institutions, things like examination processes, who's going to examine your thesis, but also peer review processes in academic journal publishing, particularly those regarded as high impact. And through funding structures, and Gatsheni, you spoke to this idea of funding, that the one who funds determines the terms of reference, right? In these platforms, alternative voices are marginalized and excluded. Moletsane argues that the peer review process produces and is produced by the power relations existing in the knowledge production arena, with concomitant struggles and contestations among different groups, institutions, and geographic locations. Where are the high impact journals located? Who are the editors? So such canonization enables the gatekeepers, and here we're talking about the peer reviewers, the journal editors, to determine what knowledge and which knowers should be included or excluded in the knowledge production enterprise. One of the things that also stand out when we're thinking about knowledge production is also the issue of language and what gets legitimized and accepted. English-speaking countries such as the United States of America, followed by the United Kingdom and Australia, dominate this arena. In contrast, Southern voices remain on the margins. I indicated in a talk I gave yesterday about the book that I recently read, which I think is very instructive, called Who Counts? Ghanaian Academic in Global Science. And it's by Chatio Tindana here at the University of Ghana and together with colleagues in the UK. And they highlighted how Africa's scholarly journals compete on an unequal playing field because of a lack of funding, as you've indicated, Prof, and the struggle to sustain academic credibility, right? Who decides what's credible and what's not? And they deem this as bibliometric coloniality, right? The matrices that we were talking about earlier, which are a set of interlinked social and technical infrastructures that allocate and gatekeep academic credibility. So the data produced by commercially owned citation indexes increasingly define legitimate academic knowledge, right? That which gets published in high impact journals is the one that's credible, is the one that is legitimate knowledge, if you will. So publication in these so-called prestigious high-impact journals can be traded for academic promotion, for job security. And I'm not sure here in Ghana, Prof, but in South Africa, this is definitely the case, that if one is to be taken seriously as a scholar, you need to publish in these high-impact journals. So foreign colonial matrices are used to determine impact, they are used to determine quality, and they are used to determine influence, how much influence your work has, right? The idea of gatekeeping, for me, aligns with Gatsheni's argument of the lack of acceptance of African decolonial and post-colonial thought and theory as objective and scientific. In this regard, Gatsheni then argues and reminds us that conventional social theory is institutionalized as social sciences, while African decolonial and post-colonial theory of thought in its various iterations is reluctantly appreciated as a humanist project, right? And pushed to the domain of humanities. And that's where it belongs, it's assumed. As such, African decolonial and post-colonial thought and theory are largely questioned for being culturalist, normative, and given to identitarian politics. Decolonization is a multifaceted endeavor that includes political, methodological, epistemological, and ethical considerations. And as Ndlovu-Gatsheni rightly points out, colleagues, this is related to dialectics between knowledge and ontology. How we come to know what is it that we know, how do we understand life, existence, as well as implications between knowledge and power. So the contemporary decolonization movement has called into question existing norms, forcing us to reevaluate and even unthink our own ways of thinking. The majority of the crises that arise in society, the political unsettlements that we have, the idea of development and what counts as development and who decides who needs to be developed, and the economy, all of these have epistemological roots. So they're not just innocent standing alone, but they all have epistemological roots. So epistemic freedom, therefore, is important. And to articulate this, we can draw from people like Steve Bantu Biko, who highlighted the importance of freeing ourselves from mental and epistemic chains. His book, aptly entitled, "I Write What I Like," functions as both a dramatic representation of the struggle for epistemic independence and a philosophical critique of the apartheid colonial intrusion into the African mind. And so Ndlovu-Gatsheni, for me's work, joins Biko by insisting that the fundamental tenet of decolonization and the defense of epistemic freedom is the acknowledgement that every human being, first and foremost, was born into meaningful and legitimate knowledge systems. Reinstating humanity to those who have been dehumanized is a fundamental aspect of both insurgent and resurgent decolonization now in the 21st century. And as I draw to a close, Program Director, I would like to close with a few thoughts from Ndlovu-Gatsheni that he makes, engaging specifically African studies, but which I think can also be applied more broadly to our institutions of higher learning, Gatsheni. And the first is the initial step towards decolonization or decolonizing our university entails acknowledging the aspirations of African people and researchers to engage in independent thought. Prof, earlier you were talking about how you did work in the community and actually learned from the community and then started theorizing from the bottom and not from the top up. And I think this is part of what this idea of acknowledging aspirations of people and how we conduct research becomes manifest, that we need to rethink the modes and the ways in which we do research. We need thinking that is free from the constraints of intellectual imperialism and colonial knowledge, while maintaining a connection to the global community. This is very critical if we are to truly think from where we are, as Gatsheni implores us to do. There must be dedication to ensuring that our institutions support the aspirations of the African people to live independently from imperialist global intentions. And of course, this also speaks to resources, right? If we're going to be dependent on funding externally all the time, then it will become difficult for us to truly get to a point where we set the agenda in our own terms. Our universities must embody the aspirations to re-establish Africa as a recognized epistemic hub, as Nkrumah believed it to be, and the domicile of Africans as independent human beings. And lastly, this year, UNISA celebrates 150 years, the institution where I come from. Years that include a complicated history that we need to confront and contemplate. So as part of this 150-year celebration, the institution has made a dedication to reclaim Africa's intellectual futures. So a concerted effort as part of the institution's strategic objective. So may we continue on this quest towards epistemic justice and a shift from intellectual imperialism. I shall pause here and thank you very much.
To interrupt you again, Kofi, and thank you, Len. Also, IAS is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. As you are celebrating your 100th, I'll make the full announcement at the end of the program. But may I invite guests to move a little bit forward now that it's question and answers, so that Prof will not be stretching to reach you. If people can just move forward. And then, please, if you don't mind, just move closer to the front seats. And while we are doing that, I initially did not realize that Professor Kojo Amano, who is the chairman of our graduate programs, IAS is a strictly graduate, apart from when we teach the University of Ghana required courses, is a graduate. We only award graduate degrees. And here is Professor Kojo Amano, who is the chairman of the graduate program in our midst. And once again, to apologize to members that signed on Zoom. Apparently, some of you had to log out, had to leave the meeting because of the threats from the hacker who was sending direct messages, having impersonated me. Please, so for some of you who have now come back, our apologies once again. This was not the making of the Institute or myself or the University of Ghana. Thank you, and we'll return to.
Okay, thank you very much. Would go on to Q&A, but if I may abuse the position as a chair to make a few comments that occurred to me. I'll go back to the point about Nkrumah's mandate to the university. I think that's an interesting point because the educational institution has always been very central to the state building project. You know, the nation state, of course, is a very young political formation. And everywhere, both in Africa and in the Western countries where it came, I mean, Benedict Anderson's notion of emerging communities, you know, the educational institution and reading, writing was a very important point there. So that may actually take us back to, you know, elementary and secondary forms of education, because the role of the state there in pushing a certain ideology is very strong. Maybe we'll agree with it because this is like instilling of a nationalistic ethos, you know, making people rise beyond the ethnic project. So I guess what type of state imposition or interference is allowable or maybe okay? And then to a more recent one, which is the information warfare. I think that touches on the predicament of the contemporary moment. You know, neoliberalism, as we both mentioned. I think, you know, the rise of fake news, post-truth, is a serious struggle between elites in the universities, in business, in politics, who now have a convergence of interest with the corporate capitalists, right? And under neoliberalism, where economic policy has been set apart as something for technocrats, leaves only information and culture war issues as the valid terrain for contestation. So I think there's an important connection there. To what extent academics themselves are implicated in all of these processes, which tend back to have a direct impact on academic freedom. And I think it's important that this is happening in America. That's where we are seeing it most highlighted, because America is so advanced. So it's very clear to see the disintegration of the entire system in relief, sharp relief there. And, you know, I wouldn't hesitate to say America is not a democracy. It's a military dictatorship, pure and simple. Of course, you know, maybe the difference would be between 1984 and Brave New World. One kind of dictatorship, if you want to look at North Korea as a, you know, a kind of 1984 big brother. In the US, you have a sickly sweet kind of dictatorship, right? But if you go against the line, like Julian Assange, you'll be rotting in Belmarsh prison, you know, without trial, maximum security. And it's a warning to journalists, to academics. And you know, for a very long time, even the liberal institutions failed to come to his defense. And so, again, this distinction between liberal and right-wing, I think, under neoliberalism is very false, because they all subsist under these cultural issues. The economic policy has been set apart, right? And again, if you look at America, housing policy, you know, fighting homelessness, employment, raising the minimum wage is out of the question. Who is going to pay for it? But if there's war, you know, the day after, you know, the Hamas crisis, Biden sent to Congress one of the biggest requests for military aid. So again, I think it is very important, and we can see the fallout in terms of academic freedom on campus. And I think the impact reverberates to the universities here, because we are reliant on funding for our own research because of collaborations, right? So what are we willing to speak out openly about? You know? So, and I think that's, I made this one about brutal and banal repression. So I guess what you have under neoliberal democracy is kind of banal repression. And talking about neoliberalism, the dominance of indices, rankings, and metrics. One of the, I think, insidious things about neoliberalism is how it tries to reconfigure our subjectivity, right? Someone has said that the difference between the dictatorship of the soldier and the dictatorship of the academic is that the soldier wants to control your behavior, control your body. You know, Fela talks about zombie, go and kill you. Go. The academic wants you to actually love your oppressor, to internalize the oppression so that you become it. And we've been having this debate at the University of Ghana. We are introducing a metrics-based promotion policy. What does that mean? Of course, we are coming late to the game, because even in the US, some universities are stepping away from it because it doesn't reflect reality. The universities manipulate the data that they send to these ranking agencies and whatnot. So we all know we are playing a game, but why are we playing towards it? It's because we have internalized this subjectivity, right? I was very alarmed at the constellation, you know, we almost had an identity crisis when the University of Cape was beat us in the rankings. First, these rankings don't reflect reality. But the way we do scholarship is collaboration. So, whether they, in reality are better than us or not, we work together. And what this ranking, they kind of flatten reality. Of course, reality is a lot more complex. So why did we react in this way, right? This is not the infringement of academic freedom, which is coming from politicians, the deans, vice chancellors, whatnot. But we've come to love our own oppression and wanted to live according to it. I was at a workshop at the business school, and I made this same point. And the presenter said, yes, we know, but everybody is doing it. What do you want us to do? So maybe I would end here and open the floor for Q&A, but hopefully these are some of the things we do.
Thank you very much, and it's been such an enjoying session. I have absolutely enjoyed every presentation, and I've been educated a lot more. Thankfully, I'm a scientist, chemist, structural biologist for that matter. So I don't know much about all these, except that as these discussions go on, and as a student of history sometimes, the adage, I don't know where it comes from, that for as long as the hunter is the writer of the story, then all the heroism would favor him. And I think that's part of the problem that we have and we continue to have. One of the first times I was set with somebody when I was studying in the United States was when the Ebola outbreak broke out in Sierra Leone. In a class, it had been mentioned, people were asking, is Ghana affected? And I said no. And the comment from somebody was that, oh, it's because people, when they go to funerals, it's reported, they go to funerals and they play with corpses and all that, and that's why it's spreading so high. I said, no, that's not the reason why. We have a special way of attending funerals, and part of the problem that I see is that when people go to funerals, they wash their hands in a small bowl, as whatever symbol that, and that I suspect may be the best or the biggest avenue through which the transmission was happening. This person, no, that's not how it is. That's not how it's being reported. And I was so upset that you understand my cultural practice more than me, sitting down here, not knowing anything about how funerals are organized in these places. So I think that part of the problem is that we have not been assertive enough in terms of propagating our beliefs as a people and how that influences why we do things and how we do them. But also, because of the Eurocentric nature of our education systems, many of us only wear African clothing, but our minds are purely European. And so when your kid goes to school and comes back, they no longer want to use the earthenware in grinding pepper and other stuff. Mom and Dad, why are you using earthenware when we have blenders? You are seen as a backward thinking person if you're not embracing Western technologies. And now AI and all that is changing how this argument is even going to go any further. But I think that one of the ways forward really is re-Africanization of our education systems from the kindergarten all the way through to the universities. Because if we don't begin to change the way our children think and to be assertive in every single thing they do and accepting the fact that they're Africans, and as Africans, these are the things we do, and this is why we do it, it is going to be difficult to defeat the Eurocentric nature of our education system. at the University of Ghana, as Kofi would agree with me, government is trying to institute policies that restrict one who we can admit even as a student. So the government said that I'm smarter than all the people in here, so I'm going to admit the student you are going to teach. That opens up for all kinds of manipulations. And guess the examples they use. Oh, in Europe and other places, they are doing this. And the question that I always ask them, why are you not using the fact that they are spending so much on education to this place? Why are you not importing that as a means of showing up education? So politicians, interest groups, and all that use the argument of freedom when it suits them and against you when it doesn't. And for a very long time in this university, people could not speak against things that were not going right, for the simple reason that if you're a lecturer, you remain a lecturer forever. People's fate, it had nothing to do with your extent of scholarship, nothing of the sort. But by virtue of the fact that you talk too much, you are too young, bid your time, you will be denied. And so I think that it is important we put these things in all these perspectives. But in the final analysis, we must learn how to blow our own trumpet, because I think that in the cultural wars and information wars and everything that's happening, the only way we can get our children to think the way they should is to make sure that they appreciate their Africanness and the fact that irrespective of how you've learned something, placing it beside the fact that you're an African and this is the right way to do it is going to be the way we are going to be able to defeat these concepts. Because let's not forget, many of these are deliberate attempts. They are not just promotion of academic freedoms and intellectualism and whatever. They are deliberate ways of, one, making people feel inferior, because then your people will not eat the rice that you produce in your local area because it doesn't taste as good as the whatever the Europeans are bringing. So, I mean, long story short, we must re-Africanize the child and let them appreciate the African uniqueness. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. The question I have has been somewhere answered, but I will still throw it to us, because in your article, The Cognitive Empire, you raise the point that the African struggle for epistemic justices get to even buckle down, or they don't go anywhere due to some internal logics of colonialism at play in our educational system. And then you also said we play the game that they have introduced us to because we have internalized the logics of the game. And then you said we love our own oppression. My question is, how did we get to this point? How this come about? If you're able to get this, I believe we will know how to find a solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very, very enlightening and refreshing presentation from both of you. Very much appreciated. So, a few reflections and questions, really. One is, the universities in themselves are part of the larger project of modernization and modernity. There is a relationship between modernization and the larger goal of development for which government policies tend to serve. Is it possible to successfully decolonize without deconstructing and possibly dismantling modernity or modernization. That is one. The second one has to do with whether in our current frame, it is possible to think of a decolonized academic freedom in Africa and what it will look like. What will that animal look like? I mean, decolonized academic freedom, particularly within the larger purview of societies that are pursuing, for lack of better expression, a westernized modernity. And sorry, my notes have lost on my phone. The third one has to do with whether academic freedom in Africa should serve the objectives of human well-being, and in what ways. Thank you.
All right. So my first question was, what is actually being done if we found these problems? What is actually being done to correct all this? And I was also reflecting on the fact that, are we also not the cause of this? How do we even define intelligence in the first place? If you are coming to if you are applying for school and you don't even get first class, we admit that probably the person is not that intelligent. How do we even define intelligence as Africans in the first place? We are using the Western way of defining intelligence, yet we want to culturalize everything as Africans. Yet even with education, if you are applying for a school, we think that you should have some, whether the first class, second class, because I'm sure even as it's an African studies department and someone comes with pass, I'm sure the person wouldn't get admission. Yet we say we shouldn't look at staffs in the Western way. When it comes to grading, it's being done in the Western way. We look at employment as well. What is it? After schooling, you go and you're going to be employed, first class or second class upper. Is that what actually we need on the as Africans? Is that what we need? We look at thesis supervision. It was talked about, but external supervision, I got to know that external supervision, external supervisors or those who that read are not mostly those in the country or the. Yet we say we are educated as our professors. We say we are educated to know more, yet we can't go through our own students' work and finalize that this is it. So an external supervisor, who probably is not even an African, has to go through before the student will be able to graduate or something. Is that also not an issue? And I was thinking, is there a way of separating politics from academia? Having that separation, that if it comes to academia, there should be people regulating it and not being influenced by the government. And I was also thinking, this seminar was held by the African Studies, and we are fighting for academic freedom. Shouldn't it be inclusive, all departments, because it's not only the African Studies unit. Because if only African Studies department is fighting this program, this course, and other departments are still going the same way, so then what are we fighting for if it's just this unit? Because I believe if every head or all the heads should come together, it should go far than only one unit doing it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that's
Most of the questions.
I have. Okay. Let me try to respond to the questions, starting with my sister there. What is being done? I think that's an important question which I discussed with Chikamba when I arrived here. That one of the major problems, we don't want to create an impression that we are the first to raise these questions. We are not the first to raise these questions. These questions are old and the new, in the sense that they are old, they were never answered adequately. So a question which was never answered adequately remains new. So I don't want to create an impression that what I was raising here is something new. This is why I was using the concept of resurgent and insurgent decolonization. Particularly if you are in this institute, you know that it is not new questions. These questions were raised by Nkrumah himself long ago. But what I was saying to Chika was that I see a tendency to not to continue traditions. Nkrumah starts here, Ipatan starts there, in Dakar, in Dar es Salaam, in Maputo. People undermine all that and they begin to look for new things. And they don't build on what was started and they're going forward. Whereas if they say is the Cambridge tradition is a continent. But in Africa, you try to talk about Dar es Salaam. No, that is cool. No, I'm doing something new. Every time we're looking for something new, we don't build from what existed and then build and then critique it. We do an auto-critique, which is an internal critique of what we are doing. But at the same time, we don't throw away everything. Puleng is here. The way Mandela is treated, there's no continuity. He must be dismantled so that there's nothing. Then we are young ones, we become the heroes. I don't believe in that way of doing things. I believe problematic as other generations might have been, but there are other positive things which they did. And for my sister's question about what is being done, there is a lot that was done, then discontinued. The question is, they were discontinued under what circumstances? I think it will be important to trace. We were here, we moved to here, we then regressed at what moment and what were the circumstances. An institute like this one, which dates back as 1961, there must be a lot of internal knowledge within the institute itself, which we need to always hark back to it to say, no, but in the 1970s, we tried to do this. We need to be using that experience to auto-correct ourselves as we move on, rather than to say, let's forget about Nkrumah, let's even amputate his statues, let's even do all these other things so that he doesn't exist and we create something new and we're failing to create anything new. So to me, I find that to be not the best way we are doing. And then she asked a related question to that. What are we not the problem? Yesterday, I stood up here and I said, I'm not standing up here as somebody who is the most decolonized person. I will be lying to you. I was also produced, of course, by a university which calls itself University of Zimbabwe in Harare. But what I learned is not very different from others who were in other Western universities. It was almost the same thing, which they were teaching. So the issue is to critique ourselves throughout. Every time we say decolonization, it starts with who? It starts with me. I need to always be critical of how I was produced. I need not to then destroy myself because I didn't produce myself deliberately, isn't it? But I need to show that awareness. The grading, the supervision, Nyerere, when he became the first black chancellor of the University of East Africa by then, which incorporated Dar es Salaam, Makerere, and Nairobi. He antagonized over this question. What do we do with the international standards and the local imperatives? The problem is not to throw away some, and it's really to select what works for us and what is not working for us. I think to me that would be the best way to do it. There is no civilization without standards. Every civilization has its own standards. The problem is if you take another civilization standards and make it your standards, you will do it wrongly, obviously. This is why Fanon was saying, but if decolonization is about taking over the colonial state and they run with it, why don't you allow the colonizers to continue? They know it better. So it's that. And I was very impressed by my brother, who is a scientist. Scientists normally don't talk like you. They will always say science is objective, science is truthful. But I was really impressed by that intervention. Where did I put my other questions? Ask the question, how did we get to this point? It is a question which also it tells us you don't talk about decolonizing without talking about how it was colonized. I think we need to know how it was done in order to undo it. A lot of people run to want to decolonize, but they don't tell us the mechanics and the techniques which were used to colonize. Particularly, some people will always argue that Professor was talking about the epistemic side, the culture side. I also wrote about that. There's some people who believe that there's nothing called an epistemic side. They say, no, but you can't kill knowledge as such. So we need to go into that to explain how it happens. And I always find this is where we brought in the Latin American school, particularly on the technologies of understanding how it was done. Because they quickly go to say, but the foundational problem is to colonize being human itself. And you colonize being human itself, social classification, racial hierarchization, gendering. And once we have done that, you create a social pyramid. A social pyramid in which white is full ontology, other sub-ontology, others non-ontology at all. Fair and fine, a sociologist will say, no, this was necessary, this social, that's social ordering. But from a decolonial point of view, that is not social ordering. It becomes a pyramid in which you use to say, who do I colonize? Who do I subject to genocide? Who do I enslave? You use that pyramid to target. Because how will you know that ships will leave all the way from Germany to come and take people in Elmin? While there are people there, why didn't they enslave them? They're using this pyramid that others are not subject to enslavement, others are subject to enslavement. And the justification is that they are subhuman, you question their humanity itself. And when you question the humanity of the people, fundamentally you will then question their knowledge as well, the epistemic virtue. If you say something is non-human, cows, we expect them to have no knowledge, donkeys to have no knowledge. And then if you say it's subhuman, is not non-human, then you say, but it is inferior, it is primitive. In other words, the knowledge is superstitions, is not scientific knowledge. So that's how the game happens. And Ndlovu-Gatsheni, I think, is very useful in that because he is a literary scholar, unlike me, who is a dry historian. Ndlovu-Gatsheni uses vivid examples. The detonation of a cultural bomb in the center of a universe of a people. And then the people lose confidence in their names, in their culture, in all this. Then he uses, for the modern people, the example of a computer. And they say it removes the hard disk of previous knowledge and memory and downloads the software of European thought. But he is using the computer not to mean the gadget, but to mean our heads, our minds. That's what they've done. And they do it not to say, sit down here, let me remove what was there and put something. They tell you, this is education. All of us, we ran to schools up to have PhDs in the hope that after a PhD, I'll be considered a human being, isn't it? What else did we do all these things, suffer all this, including yesterday, they were asking me, we have written over 100 publications. How do we do it? The question is, why do I do it? Because I wanted to be recognized as a human being, isn't it? We always say there is a colleague from Sierra Leone who has got 5 PhDs. Europeans don't need 5 PhDs. They don't sometimes even need a PhD. But for us, we need that because we're trying it is a seductive type of system. Come up, seductive, come up, maybe we'll recognize you hit here, you hit against the racial ceiling. Then that's why people like thinkers like Leopold Sétar Senghor, when they went up and then they realized that this was fake, they became angry and they come with negritude. So it's all these processes which are at play. Then there was a question about is it possible to decolonize without deconstructing modernity itself? Already, the decolonial approach does not start with colonialism. It goes as far back as modernity itself. And the argument, which also comes from the Latin American thinkers, is that when you look at modernity here, don't forget that it has an underside. And for us who are in the global south, we received most of the underside, not the positive aspects of modernity. So if a person like me, or like somebody standing at Elmina, the fort, and somebody standing in Amsterdam, they are talking about modernity. And the one in Amsterdam says modernity was very good. He's not lying. But for you who is standing in Elmina to say that you are lying, you are lying. So this is where the issue, the debate is. But what was arriving at Elmina was not progressive at all. It was the kidnapping, the capture, the thingification, and the selling of human beings as commodity in a market, in a most dehumanizing. And if you say that, it was happening at that time when you were actually having the positive side. The problem is when people say, we must all say modernity was bad. There are some who were on the lighter side of it, when the others were on the darker side of it. And this is why you're saying, speaking from where we are, this was not all that good. And you will find the broader debate, which is pushed by Habermas. The problem of the world is to complete the project of modernity. And then the indigenous people say, what is modernity? Is that thing which came with enslavement, with the dispossession? It means you want to finish us off. We don't want that. You remember this story which is told about an indigenous chief who, when he was being hanged in Latin America, they brought the pastor to pray for the chief. And they say, we're going to hang you, but before that, you must accept God and repent. And the chief asked, so that I go where? They say heaven. He said, who is in heaven? Then he said, there are no all Christians. And then he asked, Christopher Harambas is there. Since he was a Christian, then they said, no. He said, no, I will better go to hell. I want to go. They created hell for me here. So why should I join them the other side? So this is the dismantlement of modernity is already, we're critical of it. But the problem is also for people to say, but there are other positive aspects of modernity. We are not criticizing it because we're just anti-modernity. We are criticizing it because of the negatives it deposited on our own geopolitical spaces. If it deposited the good things, why should we hate something which is good? There is no way. We are logical, we are thinkers as well, so we will accept it. Then he asked the other question, which is about decolonizing academic freedom. How does a decolonized academic freedom will look like? I can't give a blueprint. I've presented in many spaces. The people are crying for blueprint that it will look like this. But I always emphasize the issue that it is a struggle. The quality of the product will depend on the quality of the struggles which we wage. If there is a gender problem and we solve it, we put it in. If there is a Eurocentric problem, we resolve it. the quality of the product will emerge as we fight. It doesn't, you can't draw it a priori, so to speak. Then he asked the question, how will academic freedom service humanity? In the paper here, I actually said that one of the major issues which we need to do, we need to make sure that let's not fight for academic freedom in the ivory tower, separate from the struggles for freedom outside in society. After all, we will be defended by society if we actually connect with the struggles of democratization outside. I remember when I was at the University of Zimbabwe, our president of the SRC always said, this is the only island of democracy left. But the islands of democracy are easy to destroy if they don't connect with the broader sea or desert, whatever. You can't have an island here, what we call an oasis and the desert outside. So we need to connect to those struggles. And that way, to me, is the only way that it will then actually save humanity. I don't know, Zihalo, you wanted to pick some of the issues.
I think you covered most of the things, Prof. And I think also maybe in the interest of time, if you want to give other people a chance, just one thing. I'm reminded of what W.E.B. Du Bois said, that pertinent question of what does it feel like to be a problem? And I think it then speaks to, but how do we respond to these problems? The issues of unemployment, poverty that are plaguing our society, that the government would be willing to pay so much money to go to war and fund these things. But again, it's the neoliberal thinking and the capitalist states that we're living under, that the industrial prison complex is a very profitable thing for the state, right? When we go to war, it means there's someone providing ammunition, there's someone providing arms, and therefore it serves capitalism for war to continue. It serves capitalism for Black men, our uncles, our brothers, to be thrown into jail so that we have families that are without fathers. We have families where there's challenges of poverty, and how we engage with these things at that systemic fundamental level within the university. Often the theories that we use do not attend to those. Instead, the problem is situated where within the people, that they are lazy, they don't want to work, but not thinking how this is actually how coloniality functions, that at the core of it, you are non-human or you are subhuman, therefore why should resources be provided for you? And again, it's that question of what does it be the problem? And so the answer to how do we respond to this, how do we engage, what is it that we have to do? What we're doing right now, being in this space, actually grappling with this and reflecting and talking about these issues, is a step towards saying, how do we then shift and how do we change? Because we need to understand the problem before you can be able to resolve it, and not just be quick to resolve something that you might not even understand the roots of. And so we understand that it's not only at university level, but it has to start at the basic education level, that what is it that you are taught, and how does that speak to the ways in which you understand the world and the world within which you are existing, right? So it continues for me, I think, to be a fundamental question that we still have to answer, that we are the problem, but we can also be the solution as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your patience. I know we are already about 15 minutes out of time. So thanks for staying with us. We had wanted to go online to take some questions, but I understand many of you have to go to class. So maybe we can end it here. But those who are able to hang around, continue the discussion in the corridor. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Kofi, for excellent sharing and moderation. Just by way of announcement, before we find out whether we have further announcements from Dr. J. By the way, this is a Reading Decolonization in Africa event. Reading Decolonization in Africa has got membership in up to 21 universities in 5 continents and is housed here at the University of Ghana. So this is what we do is that every now and then we come together, read writings by experts in this field, and then when people get excited in the group about any of the readings, any of the authors, then we invite them to join our seminars like this. So last year we had read Professor Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni's work alongside that of Walter Mignolo. And then there was this outcry, how do we bring him? The same way, this same series, this same Reading Decolonization group, we had also invited Sylvia Tamale to give us a presentation here sometime in 2020. It was COVID, so it was online. David Scott was here. At one point, did we finally make it with Oyorenko? Okay, no, the book on the new appetite, since we're in Prof Wash. So once in a while, we go around the continent, go around the world, bring people to come and join our people who have enjoyed their readings. So, Prof. Sabelo, you now understand why we invited you, because there were many people who thought that this is the end of the discussion if it comes to decolonization, African studies, and that somehow we must have a way to bring you here. And incidentally, this is Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni's first time being to Ghana, and he said he was looking forward to it. So the moment he heard Ghana, he just decided that this one, and he has also further told me that that the kinds of thing he has decided to do, like the workshop yesterday, and the kinds of engagement we continue to have, is also a function of the kind of hospitality he has since enjoyed from us here at the Institute and the other Ghanaians he has come across. So that's something again to give ourselves a round of applause. So I have to also thank Professor Samuel Ntewusu, the director of the Institute of African Studies. He has always been very supportive. And this one is not, there is academic freedom. So I'm not saying it to save face. So there is academic freedom. And you can have the proof. He came here, he had so many, in fact, he left a workshop in Eburi, to come and join us. Even though I made the mistake of not informing him before that he will be here. And then he left whatever he was doing to come and support our event. So that's the kind of director that directs academic freedom. So, and we can't also overlook Professor Akila Kwasoya. He has always, in fact, when we held the academic freedom events last year in August, people may not have known it because he said he must not be mentioned. But now, Prof, apologies. The thing has been bothering me that no one knew that you were bring behind most of, in fact, that kick-started the conversation. He had invited me to his house, and then after a lengthy conversation, we decided that the best thing to do is to talk to other colleagues, and then that event was convened. So even though he is no longer in active service, but he has continued to do very active and important things that serve the interests of the university. Because as you see, Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni, had said, and that's something that somehow he didn't repeat today, even though we begged him to say so. He had said that even though we critique the university, we are not critiquing the university because we don't like the university or we hate the idea of the university. It's actually out of the love for the university. So we want to make the university a much better place for everyone to live and work in. That is the reason why we say, let us critique. Because basically what we're doing is that we are critiquing ourselves as members of the university. And we can't thank Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni enough for helping to extend this conversation today. Prof, thank you so much. And to thank UTAG. UTAG backed the very meetings we had in August last year. People did not know that, but we had the full support of UTAG too, who also did at one point, in fact, he himself, the secretary of UTAG, was among those who did the 25 person member that did the presentation there. So we can't thank Dr. Jerry Jo Harrison enough for all that support, and he's here in person also. Overall, we have to thank the University of Ghana. Yes, yesterday too, you said, Prof. Gatsheni, that the custodian of academic freedom in the university is a vice chancellor. So if there are violations of academic freedom in the University of Ghana campus, we know who to, in any university anywhere in the world, we know where to start. We should talk to the vice chancellor. The vice chancellor is responsible for ensuring that academic freedom should continue. I mean, should be a thing, should be alive and kick in the university. And last year too, the vice chancellor had actually also supported us, and in fact attended the second day of the meeting throughout. So in absentia, we also recognize the vice chancellor for supporting the drive for academic freedom in the University of Ghana. So the final announcement was the senator. Has since been replaced by the new seminar coordinator, Dr. Edwin Ajay. He's also doing a very fantastic job. The director asked us to announce that Institute of African Studies is celebrating its 60th anniversary. And the grand opening is at Yuri Lodge, our own Yuri Lodge. Somewhere, if you pass through Akila Kwasoya's road, you know, the Academic Freedom Road, if you pass through towards Noguchi, that's where you have Yuri Lodge. Okay, so it's also adjacent to the stadium. So this event will take place on the 14th of December. That's next week, right? Or it's 2 weeks time. On 14th of December at 9 p.m. 16th, give out awards to all past directors of the institute, deputy directors, artistic directors, retired faculty members who have continued to play an important role for the institute. So we'll also take this opportunity to rethink African studies for the past 60 years, the kind of thing that I think Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni will be pleased with. So maybe, Prof, even if you are not going to be, surely you won't be in person, but we will invite you to also attend in person. Maybe there'll be a role for you to play on that day, depending on what the program says. We thank you all, and the grand opening is 9 p.m. on the 14th of December. Is it 9 a.m. or not? Okay. It's 9 a.m. at Yuri Lodge. Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you so much. I think I need to do this. We are 60 years old. And as an institute that was established to research, to teach, and to advocate on and about issues of Africa and the diaspora, we think that we need to celebrate it. And in doing so, we are interrogating the very first figure Kwame Nkrumah gave at the opening of this very institute, which is usually titled or has been titled the African Genius. 60 years on, to what extent have we been able to prosecute the very essence of that speech? That is what I want to do. We are inviting all our directors. They will be on stage to tell us during their tenure what they have done to be able to maybe bring about the kind of African studies that perhaps us and Nkrumah did. Then on the 16th, which will be a Saturday, the program is at 4 p.m. And that one we are going to honor our past directors, deputy directors, and our retired faculty, and our artistic directors for an important wing, the Ghana Dance Ensemble, that puts into practice everything that we research about. Their performances are not just for purposes of entertaining, but they are also performances that educate. So we honor them, and then we honor all our retired faculty. The essence is that whoever has played a role in projecting the Institute of African Studies will have to be recognized. We are doing it stage by stage. The very past director, we did that for her because she was leaving to the UK. We are going to do this for our past directors, deputy directors, artistic directors, and our faculty, retired faculty. And by the time we end the program, we are going to honor our senior and junior staff. So at the end of the day, everybody feels impacted by our actions. Thank you so much. Please, let's try and attend, especially on 14th, when we will see all our past directors. Fortunately enough, their pictures are here. So you see that we've had very nice ladies and gentlemen that have occupied this seat. Thank you so much for your attention. Prof. Clark, you are specially invited. You are a guest of honor that day. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. And to close with the photo of thanks, I return to Professor Puleng Segalo, who is now, like she said, she's now family. She was also here earlier this year on the auspice of the Reading Decolonization and the Institute of African Studies. And the moment she learned that Prof. Ndlovu-Gatsheni was arriving, and because somehow the other event earlier in the year, both of you did together, it was supposed to be in person, but he wasn't in person. So now this was an opportunity to finally be in person with Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni. Well, Kofi Asante, I mean, like we were almost done before we invited him to chair this event. Everyone knows in the middle of the semester, it's not easy. But on the spur of the moment, he accepted, and you think he was there at the beginning of the planning for the excellent chairing. We have to thank our some of our other senior colleagues. Professor Michael Pesawhite is incredible. He has sat through, he was here before many of us and has sat through all the event. Professor Michael Pesawhite, thank you so much for attending our event. Dr. Nidote is also our very senior colleague here present. He has sat through the 2.5 hours. We started a little bit late, and our apologies. And again, apologies for staying beyond time, but then it's because of the circumstances. Dr. Nidote, thank you for joining us. And for others, some of us senior colleagues here that I can't recognize, but yes, we have Dr. Oh yeah, Dr. Pius Siakwa is there. But these are very young men, even though they have become so they will still have to pay their dues before we can. Okay, but Dr. Siakwa is here, Dr. Eric Lawe is here, and Professor Dr. Muzu. Okay, you are all very welcome to the Institute of African Seminar. Okay, a seminar series, and we hope that you continue to attend the events. The seminar coordinator has said there will be another program next week. You get to know about it through the usual channels. And as for our event, the Institute celebration 60 years anniversary, you will be on the outlook, or you'll be looking out for announcement. We'll follow up with series of announcements so that you know what is going on and at what point any event is to take place. Thank you all once again for your those online. So yes, Professor Dennis Canterbury has always attended almost every of our events in the last 2 years or so. He's there online. Jonathan Bido, almost all of our events. Dr. Irene Apininado is online. Is also our own very senior colleague. Our own institute administrator, Mr. William Asare, had been incredible. Apart from logistic support, offering us logistic support for this event, he was here throughout yesterday for the Academic Freedom workshop. More than 3 hours. He sat through all of it, both in person and online. And today is the same thing. We thank you, William, for all the support. I can't recognize some other persons there. Yeah, Professor Tracy Fleming is there online. He has also been very supportive from the University of Cape Coast, has been attending all of our events. And we thank you. Oh, there. Mario Nisbe. Mario, longest time. Thank you for joining our event. Maybe one of these days during Christmas, we should visit Accra. Okay. Thank everybody for making it to this event, and we shall now call it a day. Unless director or the chair, there is any other burning. Thank you so much.
That was a good one. Sorry for keeping you.